is our methodologies relate to this overall framework of thinking about the governance structures in general, where you have the pathways. We're seeking to make appraisal more broad-based in terms of the types of perspectives, options, issues, values, imaginations that are being taken into account to open up this broader picture I went through before of how different potential pathways, technological, innovation, organisational, behavioural, whatever form they might take in a particular context, be more open about how they relate to each other and to different frameworks for valuing them. Quantitatively, as that idiom suggests, or also, this is a picture that John, I think, will show, qualitatively, deliberatively, in settings, for instance, in Highland, Kenya, thinking about a broad-based understanding of different pathways, but also representing that to wider discourse in a way that distinguishes us from some visions of sort of participatory process, conveying that in a more opened-up fashion, plural and conditional, whether that be quantitative data, qualitative information, conveying that to wider political discourse in such ways that there are handles for debate, handles for contention and dissent within the way understandings of the world are presented into that wider arena, to try and help foster what one might call a knowledge democracy by making those interpretations more accountable in that way. So, and then of course, one correlate to this is it leads to learning ecologies, the type of thing with diversity to a certain extent, but not unqualified. But now, in speaking of methods and methodology, we're down here. We're talking about what kinds of procedures, what kinds of frameworks can allow us to broaden out appreciations on these dimensions and also convey them in ways that aren't confusingly complex into wider political discourse, such that parties who are not engaged within the process of appreciation itself can get a handle on what it depends on. What are the hinge points? What are the assumptions and conditions? So this is where we are now, broadening out appraisal, opening up political processes. So, an effort then to capture what we're about. If somebody, the challenge, so sorry, so we're all very well, you've gone through incredibly bunch of vocabularies there, Andy, but what's it about? It's about helping to appreciate alternative pathways. That's what these methods are about. And when we get confused in the complex morass of detail that's coming, and already happened a bit, that's the sort of fulcrum. And why have we chosen those words? We use the word help because method alone can't do the whole job. It can only ever help. The idea that you can somehow say, well, let's leave it to a method is not only misguided, but often quite dangerous. Because there are also encompassing practices, processes, institutions, discourses within which methods have meaning and function. And anyway, the process of appreciation takes place on a very aggregate level in political discourse, and methods can't do it for you, whether they be pristine, consensus-based Habermasian deliberation, or absolutely rigorous, 10-year-long forensic, multi-country agricultural analyses of the kind that are quite fashionable in global governance circles. So methods, then, are conditioned by institutions and practices. But the flip side of that is they can also help shape them. So there is a danger, a pathology, that there are certain quarters who invest in academia too much attention on methods. Let's have the right tools. What are the tools? Don't tell us about them. Give us the tools. And there's value in that. But then the reaction to that is, well, hey, tools, if you reify what a tool is, you're missing the importance of context. But the other side of that is, tools can influence their context as well. Methods embody, crystallized out, certain kinds of assumptions and commitments about the world, which can then unfold in different institutional settings. So this is that, we've touched on it a couple of times, that kind of below-the-radar, Trojan horse political judo effect. So if you have a method, for instance, that looks like a quite technocratic decision analysis quantitative method, it can, under the right circumstances, get into institutions that are otherwise closed to qualitative appreciations of the kind of steps it's quite keen on. And only when they're in there do they realise there are levers on this thing. I'm thinking now about multi-criteria mapping, which Sean will talk about. It looked like a Cartesian sort of positivist method. But when it gets in there, they find actually, oh, hang on, there's a lever here. What does this do? Oh my God, the whole answer changes if we pull this lever. And there's a number of levers like this. It's not what we thought. It's quantitative, but it's yielding very different pictures of different framings. So there is that dynamic as well that we can hope sometimes to achieve. That's why I'm simply speaking of helping. It's about appreciation, because it's not just about understanding and epistemology, it's about evaluation and normativity. Appreciating is about both those things. It's about knowledge and action. It's about alternatives, because right at the core of it is a critical focus on alternatives. Not a hegemonic aggregating idea, like let's pull these things together, but really looking for those axes of contention. Especially, and this is where we try to have our cake and eat it, with our normativity within it, reflecting and favouring marginal interests, which will obviously vary depending on the context. If a global analysis of who's in, who's out, may not actually be reproduced at a micro level, where you get settings in which, for instance, social science is a dominant influence on appreciations of what the possibilities are, whereas in general that's not the case. And we're looking at pathways, plural. We're looking at not identifying a single pathway, but looking at what types of pathways look salient, look preferable, vary depending on the context, depending on the perspective that's taken. So, a STEPS methodology then is an ordered repertoire of conditionally appropriate methods. So, the methods are going to be conditionally appropriate. When one speaks of why we're using a method, we don't just say we're using this method because we're affiliated with X disciplinary framework. There's reasons for it. And we're trying now in this talk to explore what those reasons might be. But they concern the scope, the depth, the sensitivity, how complementary different methods might be. Because these are portfolios, these repertoires, they'll have strengths and weaknesses in respect of what we're interested in, and we can compensate that for different methods. So I'm going to try and say something then, to be a bit more clear-cut, about how we might think about those fitting together of different methods, what are the key ways in which they can complement each other, the different jobs they can do.